Marcus Chan had always prided himself on his attention to detail. As the founder of a successful tech consulting firm, he'd built his career on noticing the small things that others missed. The slight hesitation in a client's voice that meant they weren't convinced. The micro expression that revealed someone's true feelings about a proposal. The tiny inconsistencies in data that pointed to larger problems. It was this skill that had made him wealthy, respected, and until 3 months ago, blissfully ignorant of the fact that his wife was having an affair. The discovery hadn't come from any grand detective work on his part. Marcus hadn't hired a private investigator or gone through Vanessa's phone, like some paranoid husband in a bad television drama. No, the truth had revealed itself in the most mundane way possible. On a Friday afternoon in June, when he decided to surprise his wife with a weekend getaway to their beach house in the Hamptons, he'd left work early, stopped by her favorite bakery to pick up those ridiculously expensive French macarons she loved, and driven the 2 hours with the radio playing their wedding song, feeling like the romantic gesture would reignite something that had felt slightly dimmed in their marriage lately. Marcus had noticed the distance between them, of course. He wasn't completely oblivious. Vanessa had been working late more often. Her phone was always face down on the table, and their conversations had become transactional rather than intimate. But he'd attributed it to stress from her interior design business, which had been booming lately. She'd landed several high-profile clients, and Marcus had been proud of her success, even if it meant they saw less of each other. He'd thought the weekend away would be exactly what they needed to reconnect, to remember why they'd fallen in love 8 years ago, when they'd met at a mutual friend's rooftop party in Manhattan. The beach house was supposed to be empty. They'd only bought it 2 years ago, a charming weathered gray cottage with white shutters and a wraparound deck that looked out over the Atlantic. It was their sanctuary, the place they escaped to when the city became too much, where they'd spent lazy Sunday mornings drinking coffee and reading the paper, where they'd made love with the windows open and the sound of waves providing the soundtrack. Marcus had the key in his hand when he heard the laughter coming from the back deck. He'd frozen, confused at first. Had Vanessa come out here without telling him? Maybe she'd had the same idea, wanted to surprise him. But then he'd heard the second voice, deeper, masculine, saying something he couldn't quite make out, followed by Vanessa's laugh. That particular laugh she reserved for when she was truly delighted. The one that made her throw her head back and close her eyes. Marcus had felt his stomach drop even before he'd quietly walked around the side of the house. To see them, they were on the deck. Vanessa in a white sundress he'd never seen before, and a man Marcus didn't recognize. Tall and athletic with sandy blonde hair and the kind of tan that came from spending actual time outdoors rather than in tanning beds. They were sitting close together on the outdoor sofa, their bodies angled toward each other in that unmistakable way of intimacy. The man was feeding Vanessa strawberries from a bowl between them, and she was laughing, touching his arm, her wedding ring catching the late afternoon sunlight. Marcus had stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes, watching his wife with another man in their place, their sanctuary. He'd felt the world tilt on its axis, everything he thought he knew rearranging itself into a new and terrible configuration. Part of him wanted to storm onto the deck, to confront them, to demand explanations. But the part of him that had built a successful business, the part that understood strategy and timing, that part told him to wait. He'd pulled out his phone and taken photos, dozens of them, making sure to capture the intimacy between them. The hand-holding, the way Vanessa looked at this stranger with an expression Marcus hadn't seen directed at him in months. Then he'd retreated to his car, put the box of macarons on the passenger's seat, and driven back to the city with his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. That night, Vanessa had come home around 10, claiming she'd been with a client all day looking at fabric samples. Marcus had smiled and asked about her day, watched her lie to his face with an ease that suggested this wasn't the first time, and said nothing about what he'd seen. Instead, he'd gone to bed and stared at the ceiling for hours, his mind racing through possibilities and scenarios, feeling the foundation of his life cracking beneath him. The next morning, Marcus had woken up with a clarity that surprised him. The initial shock and pain were still there, sharp and present, but underneath it was something else, determination. He wasn't going to be the pathetic husband who confronted his cheating wife in some tearful, dramatic scene that would accomplish nothing. He wasn't going to give Vanessa the satisfaction of seeing him broken. No, Marcus was going to be methodical about this, strategic. If there was one thing he understood, it was how to execute a plan. Over the next few weeks, Marcus conducted his investigation with the same thoroughness he applied to his business deals. He didn't confront Vanessa, didn't let on that anything had changed. Instead, he played the part of the devoted husband while quietly gathering information. He installed security cameras at the beach house under the guise of preventing break-ins. Cameras that captured every visit Vanessa and her boyfriend made to their supposedly private getaway. He created a separate email account and began documenting everything: dates, times, locations. The little lies Vanessa told that he now recognized for what they were. The man's name was Daniel Crawford. Marcus learned from a little careful social media stalking. He was a personal trainer at an upscale gym in Tribeca, the kind of place where memberships cost more than most people's monthly rent. Daniel was 32, 5 years younger than Vanessa, and from his Instagram account, seemed to spend most of his time posting shirtless selfies and motivational quotes about living your best life. Marcus found him utterly unremarkable, which somehow made the betrayal sting even more. Vanessa hadn't left him for someone extraordinary. She'd chosen someone who posted gym selfies with captions like "crushing it" and "no days off." What surprised Marcus most during those weeks of observation was how easily Vanessa lied. She'd always been honest, or so he'd thought, one of the qualities he'd loved about her. But now he watched her fabricate entire days, create fictional meetings with clients, even go so far as to have her business partner cover for her when Marcus called the office. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd trusted completely, was a stranger. Every kiss goodbye in the morning was a performance. Every "I love you" before bed was hollow. Marcus threw himself into his work, using it as a distraction from the constant ache in his chest. His colleagues noticed his renewed intensity, assuming he was just particularly focused on their latest project, a major consulting contract with a financial firm. He let them think whatever they wanted. Only his best friend and business partner, James, knew something was wrong. But even James didn't know the full story. Marcus had simply said he and Vanessa were going through a rough patch, which was technically true if you defined a rough patch as your spouse systematically betraying you. It was James who inadvertently gave Marcus the idea for his revenge. They'd been having drinks after work one evening, a rare break from their demanding schedules, when James had mentioned his upcoming vow renewal ceremony with his wife Sarah for their 10th anniversary. Sarah's been planning it for months, James had said, rolling his eyes affectionately. It's basically a second wedding, but she's so excited about it I can't say no. You know how women get about these things. Marcus had smiled and nodded, but his mind was already working. A vow renewal, the perfect stage for the perfect revenge. Not a private confrontation that would allow Vanessa to manipulate the narrative or make him seem like the villain. Not a quiet divorce where she could tell people they'd simply grown apart. No, Marcus would give Vanessa exactly what she deserved, a public reckoning in front of everyone. They knew at the moment when she thought she was being celebrated. The plan took shape over the following weeks with the same meticulous attention to detail Marcus applied to everything else in his life. He would suggest a vow renewal ceremony for their upcoming 8th anniversary in September. Play the role of devoted husband so perfectly that Vanessa would never suspect anything was wrong. He'd plan an elaborate ceremony, invite everyone they knew, make it a grand celebration. And then, at the moment when Vanessa thought she was renewing her commitment to him, he would expose her affair to everyone present and walk away with his dignity intact. But first, Marcus needed to transform himself. Not for Vanessa, not to win her back, but for himself. He needed to become the kind of man who could execute this plan without flinching. Who could look at his wife every day knowing what she'd done and not crack? More than that, he needed to remember who he was beyond this marriage, beyond the betrayal. He needed to become himself again. Marcus joined a gym, not the trendy place where Daniel worked, but a serious boxing gym in Brooklyn where the focus was on training rather than being seen. He started going every morning at 5:30 before work, pushing his body until the physical pain overtook the emotional pain, at least temporarily. The discipline of training, the focus required to improve, gave him something concrete to work toward. Within a month, he'd lost 15 pounds and gained definition in his arms and shoulders. Within 2 months, he could actually hold his own sparring with some of the regular fighters. He also overhauled his wardrobe with the help of a personal stylist James recommended. Out went the safe, boring business casual clothes he'd been wearing for years, replaced with tailored suits that actually fit properly, designer jeans that made him look 10 years younger, and shirts that showed off his newly muscular frame. He got a better haircut, started using actual skincare products, and even splurged on a luxury watch he'd been eyeing for years, but always thought was too extravagant. If he was going to blow up his life and start over, he might as well look good doing it. The transformation didn't go unnoticed. His colleagues complimented him on his appearance. Several women at the gym made it clear they were interested, and even Vanessa commented on how good he looked, though Marcus detected a slight unease in her compliments, as if she wasn't quite sure what to make of this new version of her husband. Good. Let her wonder. Let her feel even a fraction of the uncertainty he'd felt watching her with another man. Marcus also began seeing a therapist, something he probably should have done years ago, but had always dismissed as unnecessary. Dr. Patricia Hayes was in her 50s, with gray hair she wore in a no-nonsense bun and an ability to cut through bullshit that Marcus found both intimidating and refreshing. She didn't coddle him or tell him what he wanted to hear. Instead, she asked hard questions and made him examine his own role in his marriage's deterioration, even as she validated his anger about the affair. You're planning something," Dr. Hayes had said in their fourth session, her sharp eyes studying him over her reading glasses. "I can see it in the way you talk about your wife, in the way you've structured your life these past few months. You're preparing for something." Marcus had considered lying, but realized there was no point. "I'm planning to expose her affair publicly at a vow renewal ceremony I'm going to suggest. I want everyone to see what she did." Dr. Hayes had been quiet for a long moment. "And you think this will make you feel better? Public humiliation as revenge? I think it will give her a fraction of the humiliation I felt finding out. I think it will prevent her from controlling the narrative about our marriage ending. And yes, I think it will feel satisfying to watch her face when she realizes everyone knows the truth." Marcus had leaned forward, his jaw tight. "She gets to walk away from this with the house, with most of the assets, because I don't care about fighting over money. The least I can do is make sure people know why our marriage ended. Revenge is a normal human emotion," Dr. Hayes had said carefully, "and I'm not going to tell you not to feel it, but I want you to really consider what you're sacrificing for this moment of satisfaction. You're spending months living a lie, smiling at someone you're angry at, planning an elaborate deception. That takes a toll on your mental health, Marcus. It's keeping you stuck in this betrayal rather than allowing you to move forward." "I'll move forward after," Marcus had insisted. "Once she understands what she did, once everyone knows the truth, then I can move on." Dr. Hayes had made a note on her pad. "We'll see," was all she said, but Marcus knew she didn't believe him. Despite his therapist's reservations, Marcus moved forward with his plan. In early July, he broached the subject with Vanessa over dinner at their favorite Italian restaurant, the one where they'd celebrated every anniversary since their wedding. He'd chosen the setting carefully, knowing the nostalgia of the place would make her more receptive. "I've been thinking," Marcus had said, reaching across the table to take Vanessa's hand, suppressing the revulsion he felt at touching her now that he knew where those hands had been. "Our 8th anniversary is coming up in September, and I know things have been a bit distant between us lately, with both of our careers being so busy. What if we did something special, something to recommit to each other and remind ourselves why we fell in love in the first place?" Vanessa had looked surprised, perhaps even uncomfortable, but she'd recovered quickly with a smile. "What did you have in mind?" "A vow renewal ceremony," Marcus had said, watching her face carefully. "Nothing too big, just our closest friends and family. Maybe at the botanical gardens you've always loved. We could make it a real celebration, show everyone how strong we are together." He'd squeezed her hand, putting every ounce of sincerity he could muster into his expression. "I love you, Vanessa. I want the world to know it." He'd seen the conflict in her eyes, the guilt warring with her desire to maintain the facade of their marriage, and he'd seen the moment she decided to go along with it, probably thinking that recommitting to their marriage publicly would somehow absolve her of the affair. Or maybe she planned to end things with Daniel before the ceremony. Marcus didn't care what she was thinking. He just needed her to say yes. "That sounds beautiful," Vanessa had finally said, her voice slightly choked. "I'd love that." Marcus had smiled and raised his wine glass in a toast. "To us and to the next chapter of our marriage." They'd clinked glasses, and Marcus had watched Vanessa drink, noting the way her hand trembled slightly. Good. She should be uncomfortable. She should feel the weight of her lies, even if she didn't know he was aware of them yet. The next 2 months were a masterclass in deception on both sides. Marcus threw himself into planning the ceremony with an enthusiasm that must have seemed genuine to Vanessa, though he noticed she seemed distracted, often checking her phone and occasionally disappearing for hours, with vague explanations about client meetings. The security cameras at the beach house continued to capture her visits with Daniel, and Marcus added each video to his growing collection of evidence. He worked with a wedding planner, an efficient woman named Margaret, who'd organized countless events and was thrilled to help plan what she kept calling such a romantic gesture. Marcus spared no expense, booking the Brooklyn Botanic Garden for an evening ceremony in September, hiring caterers, a photographer, a band, even a videographer to capture every moment. He wanted the production value to match the drama of what was about to unfold. The guest list was carefully curated, their families, their closest friends, colleagues from both of their businesses, neighbors, basically everyone who knew them as a couple. Marcus wanted an audience large enough that the story of what happened would spread quickly, preventing Vanessa from spinning some alternative version of events. 200 people received elegant invitations with embossed lettering announcing the vow renewal of Marcus and Vanessa Chan. Marcus also hired a lawyer, a shark of a woman named Rebecca Martinez, who specialized in high net worth divorces. He explained his situation and his plan, and Rebecca had raised an eyebrow but nodded approvingly. Unconventional, but I can work with it, she'd said. Let's make sure we have everything documented properly so there are no surprises when we file. Together, they drafted divorce papers that were generous to Vanessa, perhaps overly so. Marcus wanted it clear that this wasn't about money or assets. It was about the principle. She could have the house in the city, their beach house, both cars, and half of their joint savings. Marcus would keep his business and his retirement accounts. It was more than fair, and it would prevent any claims that he'd been vindictive or trying to ruin her financially. Are you sure about this? Rebecca had asked, reviewing the terms. You're giving her a lot. I'm giving her things, Marcus had corrected. Things I can replace. What I'm taking is her ability to play the victim, to make it seem like I'm the bad guy. Money I can make again. Dignity, once lost, is much harder to recover. Rebecca had smiled slightly. You're going to be just fine, Mr. Chan. I can tell. Throughout this planning process, Marcus maintained his physical transformation, continuing to work out daily and eat carefully. He started taking salsa dancing lessons, something he'd always wanted to do, but Vanessa had dismissed as silly. He read more, traveled to Los Angeles for a business conference and extended it into a weekend just for himself, seeing concerts and visiting museums and remembering what it felt like to enjoy things without worrying about someone else's opinion. He also started going to therapy twice a week instead of once, working through the layers of hurt and anger with Dr. Hayes. She continued to express concern about his plan, but she also helped him prepare for the aftermath, for the reality of actually executing his revenge and what his life would look like. On the other side of it, what happens after? Dr. Hayes had asked in a session in mid-August, about a month before the ceremony. Let's say everything goes exactly as you planned. You expose her publicly, everyone sees the videos, she's humiliated, you walk away. Then what? You go home to an empty apartment and do what? Marcus had thought about it carefully. I move forward with my life. I focus on my business, my health, my friends. I date when I'm ready. I rebuild, and you think you'll feel satisfied? that the revenge will have been worth it? I think I'll feel like I didn't let her get away with it, Marcus had said firmly. I think I'll feel like I stood up for myself instead of being the pathetic husband who got cheated on and did nothing about it. There's no shame in being cheated on, Dr. Hayes had reminded him gently. The shame is entirely hers for the choice she made. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Maybe not, Marcus had conceded, but I need to prove it to myself. I need to know that I'm the kind of person who doesn't accept being treated this way, who demands better. If I just divorce her quietly, I'll always wonder if I was too weak to stand up for myself. Dr. Hayes had sighed, but nodded. Then make sure you're doing this for the right reasons, not to hurt her, but to help yourself. And make sure you're prepared for how this might change you. Revenge has a cost, Marcus, even when it's justified. As September approached, Vanessa seemed increasingly anxious. She'd lost weight, had dark circles under her eyes, and was snippier than usual. Marcus wondered if she was feeling guilty about the affair or if she was planning to end it before the ceremony and was struggling with that decision. The security camera showed that her visits to the beach house with Daniel had actually increased in frequency, as if she were cramming in as much time with him as possible before she had to recommit to her marriage. Marcus felt nothing watching those videos now except a cold determination. The initial pain had hardened into something else, something more focused. He was ready. The stage was set. The players were in position, and soon everyone would see Vanessa for who she really was. The night before the ceremony, Marcus had dinner with James and Sarah, who'd been instrumental in helping with the planning. They'd toasted to his and Vanessa's marriage, told stories about the four of them over the years, and wished him well for tomorrow. Marcus had smiled and laughed and played his part perfectly, but inside he was counting down the hours. When he got home that night, Vanessa was already in bed, seemingly asleep. Marcus stood in the doorway of their bedroom, looking at her in the dim light from the hallway, and felt an unexpected wave of sadness. Not sadness about losing her, but sadness about what they'd had, or what he'd thought they'd had. That had turned out to be an illusion. 8 years of his life built on a foundation that had crumbled the moment she'd decided someone else was worth more than their vows. He slept in the guest room that night, claiming he didn't want to disturb her rest before the big day. In reality, he couldn't stand the thought of lying next to her for one more night. Couldn't maintain the charade in the intimate darkness of their bedroom. Tomorrow, it would all be over. Tomorrow, he would be free. The day of the ceremony dawned clear and beautiful. The kind of perfect September day that seemed designed for celebrations. The temperature was in the mid-70s, the sky was cloudless, and a gentle breeze kept everything comfortable. Marcus woke early, went for one last workout at his gym, and then returned home to shower and dress in the custom Tom Ford suit he'd bought specifically for this occasion. It was charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, fit him perfectly, and made him look like a man in complete control of his life. Vanessa was already up when he got back, having spent the morning at a salon getting her hair and makeup done. She looked beautiful, Marcus had to admit, in a knee-length pale blue dress that complemented her skin tone. Her hair was styled in loose waves, and her makeup was natural but polished. She looked like the woman he'd fallen in love with, which made what he was about to do both easier and harder at the same time. "You look amazing," he told her, meaning it even as he prepared to destroy her day. "So do you," she replied. and he thought he saw tears in her eyes. "Marcus, I just want you to know that I really do love you. I know I haven't always shown it lately, but I do." He wondered if she was about to confess, to tell him about Daniel and ask for forgiveness before they went through with the ceremony. Part of him almost hoped she would, because it would make what he was about to do feel even more justified. But she didn't. She just kissed him on the cheek and said they should get going, or they'd be late to their own ceremony. They drove separately to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, Vanessa with her sister, who was serving as her maid of honor, and Marcus alone, which gave him time to collect his thoughts. He had the USB drive with all the videos in his jacket pocket, along with the envelope containing the divorce papers. Everything was ready. All he had to do was follow through. The garden was transformed when he arrived. Margaret, the wedding planner, had outdone herself. The ceremony was set up in the rose garden, with white chairs arranged in rows facing an arch covered in white roses and greenery. String lights had been hung in the trees overhead, ready to twinkle when evening fell. Tables for the reception were arranged on the lawn nearby, covered in crisp white linens and decorated with centerpieces of roses and hydrangeas. A string quartet played softly as guests arrived. Marcus greeted people as they came in, playing the role of nervous groom all over again, accepting congratulations and well wishes. He saw his parents looking proud and happy. He saw Vanessa's mother, who had always been kind to him, who had no idea what her daughter had been doing. He saw friends from college, colleagues from work, neighbors they'd had dinner parties with, all of them here to celebrate a marriage that had already ended, even if they didn't know it yet. Vanessa arrived and immediately went to a small tent that had been set up as a bridal area. The ceremony was scheduled for 6 o'clock, just as the afternoon sun would start its descent, providing perfect lighting for photos. Marcus checked his watch. 5:30. 30 minutes until everything changed forever. He found the AV technician he'd hired, a young guy named Chris, who thought he was setting up a slideshow of romantic photos from Marcus and Vanessa's relationship. "Everything ready?" Marcus asked. "All set," Chris confirmed. "The screen is in position, the projector is connected, and I tested it earlier. Just give me the signal when you want me to start the slideshow." Marcus patted his pocket where the USB drive sat. "Perfect. I'll let you know when." The ceremony began right on time. The string quartet transitioned into Pachelbel's Canon in D, and the guests stood as Vanessa walked down the aisle with her father. She looked radiant, smiling at everyone, and when she reached Marcus and took his hands, he felt her trembling slightly. Nerves or guilt? He'd never know and didn't care anymore. The officiant, a friend of theirs who'd gotten ordained online specifically for this event, began with the traditional opening about gathering together to celebrate love and commitment. He made a few jokes that got gentle laughs from the crowd. He talked about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of honoring your vows. Marcus almost laughed at the irony, but kept his face neutral and loving. "Marcus and Vanessa have written their own vows," the officiant announced. "Marcus, would you like to go first?" This was the moment. Marcus took a deep breath and nodded. But instead of launching into romantic vows, he turned to face the assembled guests. "Actually, before we get to that, I'd like to say a few words to everyone here. Thank you all so much for coming to celebrate with us today. Your presence means the world to us, and I wanted to take a moment to really share our love story with you." He pulled out the small remote control he'd given to Chris earlier and held it in his palm, where Vanessa couldn't see it. Marriage is built on trust, on honesty, on to people choosing each other every single day. And I think it's important, when you're renewing your vows, to be honest about who you really are as a couple. Vanessa was looking at him with a slightly confused expression, not yet alarmed, but sensing something was off. Marcus turned and nodded to Chris, who started the projector, a large screen that had been set up to the side of the ceremony area, which guests had probably assumed was for photos, suddenly lit up with an image of the beach house. The first video began to play. Vanessa and Daniel on the deck, kissing. The timestamp clearly visible in the corner. 3 months ago, the day Marcus had first discovered them. A collective gasp went through the crowd. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Vanessa whispered, her face going white. "Telling the truth," Marcus replied calmly. He turned back to the guests as the video continued, showing more footage. Vanessa and Daniel holding hands, feeding each other, laughing together in the intimate way of lovers. "You see, about 3 months ago, I found out that my wife has been having an affair, and rather than confront her privately, I thought it would be more appropriate to address it here, publicly, since she's been very publicly presenting herself as a devoted wife while privately doing this." The screen continued to show video after video, a montage Marcus had carefully edited together. Different days, different outfits, but always the same betrayal. The crowd was in shock, some people standing, others covering their mouths. Vanessa's mother looked like she might faint. Vanessa grabbed Marcus's arm. "Stop this! Please, just stop it!" She was crying now, mascara running down her face, her carefully styled appearance dissolving. "No," Marcus said firmly, removing her hand from his arm. "You don't get to ask me for anything. You made your choices, and now everyone gets to see them." He pulled the envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. As the final video played on the screen, a particularly intimate moment between Vanessa and Daniel that made several people in the crowd turn away. "These are divorce papers. I've already signed them. You get the house, the beach house, where you've been spending so much quality time lately, both cars, and half our savings. I'm keeping my business and my dignity." The screen finally went dark. The garden was silent except for Vanessa's sobs and some uncomfortable murmuring from the guests. Marcus turned to face them all one final time. "I want to thank you all for coming today. I know this isn't the celebration you expected, but I needed you all to see the truth about why this marriage is ending. The story I'm sure Vanessa would have told you eventually about us growing apart or wanting different things, that would have been another lie. The truth is she cheated, repeatedly, in our home, and then looked me in the eye every day and pretended everything was fine." He looked at Vanessa, who had collapsed into her father's arms, still clutching the divorce papers. "I loved you," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotions roiling inside him. "I would have given you anything, done anything for you, and you threw it away for a personal trainer who posts gym selfies. I hope it was worth it." Marcus turned and began walking down the aisle, away from the altar, away from Vanessa, away from the marriage that had defined his adult life. As he walked, something unexpected happened. A few people started clapping. Not everyone, and not loudly, but enough that others joined in. By the time he reached the end of the aisle, maybe a third of the guests were applauding, apparently approving of his decision to expose the truth so dramatically. James was waiting for him at the back, his face a mixture of shock and admiration. Holy shit, man! That was necessary, Marcus finished. He glanced back one more time to see Vanessa being led away by her sister and mother, still crying. The beautiful ceremony area now in chaos as guests talked among themselves, some looking horrified, others seemingly entertained by the drama. Come on, let's get out of here. They walked out to the parking lot together, leaving behind the wreckage of what was supposed to be a celebration. Marcus felt strange, not quite the rush of satisfaction he'd expected, but not regret either. More like exhaustion, as if he'd been holding his breath for 3 months and could finally exhale. Did you know you were going to do that? James asked as they reached Marcus's car. I've been planning it since July, Marcus admitted. I needed everyone to see the truth, to know why our marriage ended. I couldn't let her control the narrative. James whistled low. Well, mission accomplished. That's going to be all anyone talks about for months. But man, are you okay? That was brutal. I'm fine, Marcus said, and he was surprised to realize he meant it. Better than I've been in months, actually. It's over. The pretending, the lying to everyone, including myself, it's all done. He drove home to the apartment he'd rented a month ago, a temporary place, while he figured out his next move. It was small but modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, completely different from the traditional brownstone he'd shared with Vanessa. He poured himself a glass of scotch, sat on the balcony, and watched the sun set over Manhattan. His phone started buzzing almost immediately. Texts from friends who'd been at the ceremony, some supportive, some asking if he was okay, a few clearly just looking for gossip. He ignored most of them, responding only to James to confirm he was fine and would talk to him tomorrow. There was nothing from Vanessa, which he'd expected. What was she going to say? He'd made sure there was nothing left to say. Dr. Hayes called around 9. I heard about what happened, she said without preamble. How are you feeling? Surprisingly okay, Marcus told her honestly. I thought I'd feel more satisfaction, more vindication. Mostly I just feel tired and ready to move on. That's actually healthy, Dr. Hayes said. Revenge rarely feels as good as we think it will. The anticipation is often more satisfying than the actual act. But you stood up for yourself, you controlled the narrative, and now you can close this chapter. That's what matters. They talked for a while longer, with Dr. Hayes making him promise to come in for a session later in the week. After he hung up, Marcus sat in the growing darkness and thought about what came next. He was single for the first time in 8 years, successful in his career, physically in the best shape of his life, and free from the weight of Vanessa's betrayal. The future was uncertain, but it was his future to shape however he wanted. The following days brought exactly the fallout Marcus had anticipated. The story of the ceremony spread quickly through their social circles and beyond. Several people sent him links to social media posts discussing what had happened, some presenting him as a hero who'd stood up to a cheating spouse, others criticizing his methods as cruel and humiliating. Marcus didn't engage with any of it. He'd said what he needed to say at the ceremony. Everything else was just noise. Vanessa's lawyer reached out to Rebecca 3 days after the ceremony. Vanessa was willing to sign the divorce papers as Marcus had proposed them, with no contests or modifications. She just wanted it done quickly and quietly. Rebecca called Marcus to confirm he was still comfortable with the terms, and he was. He'd never wanted to drag this out or fight over assets. He just wanted the truth known and then to move on with his life. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later, streamlined because of their prenuptial agreement and Vanessa's desire to avoid any additional public drama. Marcus signed the papers in Rebecca's office on a gray November afternoon, his signature officially ending 8 years of marriage. He felt a pang of something, sadness maybe, for what he'd hoped his life would be, but also relief that it was truly over. "You're a free man," Rebecca said, shaking his hand after the papers were filed. "What are you going to do now?" "Live my life," Marcus said simply. Better than before. He threw himself into his work over the next several months, taking on new clients and expanding his business in ways he'd been too comfortable to pursue before. Without the energy drain of his failing marriage and the months of planning his revenge, he found he had focus and drive that surprised even himself. By the new year, his company's revenue had increased by 40%, and he'd hired 3 new consultants to handle the workload. Marcus also continued his physical transformation, not as obsessively as before, but maintaining the routine he'd established. Boxing 3 mornings a week, running on other days, eating well.